How do we see the sun when it stands high and illumines our world? Do we see the truth, or do we see its face as the fog-shrouded composite image of numerous fairy tales? Grand fairy tales about the sun are taught in nearly all the schools. Students are even graded on their personal efficiency in learning the fairy tales. Those tales are many. Those who learn them well earn themselves an A on their report card. That's the school song. But do the students in the end, including the A students, know anything that is intrinsically true about the sun, or resembles the truth even remotely? Of course they don't. And why should anyone be worried about that? Discovering the truth, especially the truth about our sun, hasn't been on the agenda in the schools for a long time. Thus, I need to repeat the question: how do we behold the sun when it illumines our world? Do we see it how it really is? Hardly. We behold the fairy tales that are taught. Let's review the fairy tales. For starters, the sun is deemed to be a large sphere of hydrogen gas that is more than 1,000,000 times larger in volume than the Earth and contains 300,000 times more mass. The enormous mass of it is deemed to be so large, acting on the core, that the gas becomes compressed in the core to a density that is 150 times greater than the density of water, which adds up to 13 times the density of the element lead. Something doesn't add up here. With the sun having a core that is 13 times more dense than lead, the sun should be 1,000 times heavier than it is known to be. Instead of being immensely heavy, the measured mass density of the sun is roughly equal the same as that of Jupiter, with the core of the sun being 13 times heavier than lead. The measured extremely light weight of the sun should not be possible. So where can we find the truth? The truth is fairly obvious, isn't it? It is simply not possible for the sun to be a sphere of hydrogen gas. The measured evidence precludes this option. If one looks at the evidence with the eye of the mind, only one option remains for a superlight sun to exist. This option is that the sun exists as a sphere of plasma. Plasma is a soup that contains the primary particles that all the atoms are made of. There exists two types of such particles, called protons and electrons. They are both electrically charged. Protons repel each other by the electric force, by their positive polarity, and so do the electrons by their negative polarity. However, both attract one another. The ratio between them, between their mutual repulsion and attraction, determines to a large degree a plasma's density. The balance of the forces in plasma enables a superlight sun to exist, even a supergiant sun, which is not possible otherwise. The evidence that this is so pins the label of truth onto the plasma-type sun. Let's get back to the fairy tales. Many more fairy tales have been written about the sun. One of the great fairy tales is that the sun is heated internally by nuclear fusion occurring in its core that combines hydrogen atoms into helium atoms and generates energy in the process. Since the sun cannot be a sphere of hydrogen gas, this tale is not really possible, is it? We have ample evidence that the impossible does not actually happen in the real sun. No giant reactor lurks under the surface of the sun deep within it. This becomes evident when sunspots erupt that are holes ripped into the solar surface. By looking through the umbra of the sunspots, we see a dark sun inside, below the surface, in every case. The sun reveals itself thereby as being essentially dark and empty below the surface. This does not mean that nuclear fusion is not occurring on the sun. It only means that the fusion reactions occur on the surface of the sun, not within it. On the surface, interstellar plasma is fused into atomic elements by electric concentration and acceleration of interstellar plasma onto the sun. The entire solar surface thereby becomes a plasma fusion reactor. The resulting, rather plainly apparent evidence pins another label of truth onto the plasma-type sun. Now let's get back to the fairy tale for more of its imaginary stories that are far removed from the truth. The fairy tale about the sun has still another type of deep flaw. The flaw is that in a tightly confined nuclear fusion cell, the fusion product dilutes the fusion fuel and snuffs the process out. Every fusion reactor on Earth has this problem. The longest fusion burn achieved to date, on the machine shown here, lasted just slightly under a single second, and that's the world record, the best result that has been achieved. Obviously, the sun wouldn't burn long on this basis, with its fusion product clogging up its reactor at the core. Nor is it possible for the generated helium to become vented away from the core. The heavy helium would have to work its way to the surface against the force of the massive solar gravity across 500,000 kilometers of solar mass. The obvious fact is that the purging of the core cannot be happening. Now consider the equally obvious fact that the purging of the solar fusion product is not a big issue for the plasma-type sun, where the nuclear fusion reactions occur on the surface. These obvious facts, of course, pin another label of truth onto the plasma sun. So what about the solar fairy tale then? Is this all there is? Oh, there are more stories embedded, stories of sheer fantasy. One of these stories is the hydrogen paradox. The Sun as a hydrogen sphere is a paradox. We are told that the Sun is the product of gravitational condensation of a cloud of primordial atomic elements that originated in the Big Bang explosion 13.6 billion years ago. If this was so, by what miracle would the hydrogen atoms separate themselves out from the rest and congregate together to become a sun? Shouldn't the Sun, with its enormous gravity, have captured all the heavy elements according to the condensation theory, instead of all the heavy elements being found contained in the planets? Gravitational condensation does not happen the way the fairy tales tell the story. The real evidence is totally different. Of course, the impossible paradox that the makeup of the solar system presents us is not a paradox in the plasma universe, where the Sun is forged from high-density concentrations of plasma that enables nuclear fusion reactions to occur on its surface, where all the atomic elements in the solar system are synthesized, and have been synthesized for as long as the Sun existed. The synthesized elements are carried with the solar wind. The heavy elements, of course, fall out first from the solar wind and form the inner planets. This pattern is also evident in the heavy gases, being predominant across the inner planets. This is the reason why we see all the major atomic elements being present in the Sun's atmosphere. We see them there because they are being created there, from where they flow away with the solar wind. All the atomic elements in the universe were created by a sun. Gravitational condensation of Big Bang fairy tale dust is not needed for the universe to exist, or is even possible. Thus the solar system as we have it, all by itself, pins the label of truth onto the plasma sun. This brings us to a number of other paradoxes that the fairy tale doesn't even attempt to explain, as if it was some sort of miracle. It is a mystery in fairy tale land of what is called modern solar physics, that the solar wind is being accelerated away from the sun against the force of gravity to the enormous speed of up to 800 kilometers per second. This shouldn't be happening if the sun was internally powered. Of course, if the sun was powered by electric plasma interactions on its surface, the high-speed solar wind acceleration is completely natural and expected. The process that accelerates the solar wind is so natural that it can be replicated in principle in the laboratory by replicating the function of the individual fusion cells that generate the solar wind. Thus, the solar wind paradox, being resolved all by itself, pins the label of truth once more onto the electrically powered plasma sun. The plasma sun doesn't have a paradox there, it solves the paradox. Now let's get back to the fairy tale model once more. which includes still another paradox that is deemed a sort of miracle in the fairy tale. The paradox is that of the sun's superheated corona. The corona that surrounds the sun, extending for long distances, is known to be several hundred times hotter than the surface of the sun below it. The solar surface is measured at 5,505 degrees Celsius, while the corona has been measured in the range of millions of degrees. How is this possible, if all the heat is deemed to come from the inside of the sun? That's an impossible paradox to solve, isn't it? Of course, for a plasma sun, the phenomenon of the superheated corona is not paradoxical. Here, the solar corona is a mixture of atomic elements flowing away from the sun, which are agitated by the electric interaction of flowing plasma streams that the atoms encounter, such as the high-speed solar wind and the inflowing plasma streams. What we see here simply means that the heating of the solar corona is not a function of the heat emitted by the sun, but is created by its own electric dynamic process that is a typical aspect of the plasma sun. Thus, the sun's corona too pins the label of truth onto the electrically powered plasma sun. We always seem to come back to that. With so many labels of truth pinned on the electric plasma sun, it is self-evident that the truth lies outside the fairy tale land of the internally powered sun. Not a single item of evidence exists in support of the internally powered sun. None whatsoever. One may predict from this near-infinite contrast between the truth and the fairy tale that the truth will someday be taught in the schools and be acknowledged in society. The reason why this is presently not the case is obviously political in nature. The global warming doctrine rests on the theory of the sun being an invariable constant, for which the theory of the internally powered sun is essential. With the sun being deemed an invariable constant, it can be argued that all climate fluctuations on Earth must result from man-made causes. For this, enormous penalties are being inflicted on humanity, such as the destruction of industries and the mass burning of food in a starving world. The mass burning of food in the form of biofuels that are burned in automobiles is murdering up to 100 million people a year with starvation, as demanded by the depopulation policy in defense of the system of empire and its feudal platform. Thus, the entire green ideology and its devastating consequences is built squarely on a theory about our sun that is demonstrably false in every respect. And this too is only the fringe effect of the false theory. The greatest danger of the false theory is that it blocks the recognition of the presently unfolding solar dynamics in which we can see the start of the next ice age occurring in potentially the 2050s time frame, with the sun going inactive at this time. for as long as the recognition of the truth about the sun remains blocked, the infrastructures will not be created that are needed to enable the relocation of all the northern nations into the tropics, together with their agriculture and their industries, when their territory becomes uninhabitable under the inactive Ice Age sun. When the building of the needed infrastructures remains blocked or long delayed, more than 90% of humanity is doomed to starve to death when the Ice Age transition occurs. I expect that the truth about our sun, which is actually rather simple and is already understood scientifically, will be acknowledged in time sufficiently to prevent the greatest potential universal suicide in human history. It is as simple as that. Our hope, therefore, literally lies in the fundamental nature of our humanity. That includes a profound love for the truth. In fact, the recognition of the great Ice Age challenge before us, which depends on a truthful recognition of the nature of our sun, is of critical importance for the healing of society, of all its faith in the presently major devastating false theories in the political world that are destroying our precious humanity and civilization. These false theories are called monetarism, war and nuclear war, environmental fascism, and depopulation. None of these theories stand on a single element of truth, nor will these theories be overturned by technical adjustments in the form of laws. The games of adjustment of the theories do not eradicate the lack of truth in these theories, but hide the lack thereof. Hopefully, the great magnitude of the Ice Age challenge and the focus on the truth that it inspires will be sufficient at last to break the logjam against the truth that all the other dangerous false theories are built on, that are presently destroying civilization and threaten human extinction, as in the case of nuclear war. But with the power of the mind, which is inherent in us as human beings, we have the means at hand to lift ourselves above the fog of faith in fairy tales and reorient the world onto the path of universal freedom in a renaissance of truth. Why should we not be able to do this small thing? Seeing the truth with the mind is native to our humanity. When a slave boy can understand absolute truth, as in Plato's story of the Meno dialogue, then, obviously, so can we all.